So welcome, and we hope you'll follow us on our website and come to future events and consider joining us as members. My name is John Van Horn. I'm currently the temporary interim director of the library company. But in 2007, when I was the director, we established our program in African American history with a grant from the Albert M. Greenfield Foundation. And we have such a program because, as part of the collection that I just described, we have one of the greatest accumulations of materials from the mid-16th to the mid-19th centuries, dealing with all aspects of the Black experience in America. We have about 15,000 items, books, pamphlets, manuscripts, graphic works, and it's one of our strongest collections, and it's the one that gets pretty much the heaviest use by the scholars who come here to work. After a few successful pilot project years of that program, we got a challenge grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities to endow the program in perpetuity, so that now we have the funds to provide research fellowships for scholars and acquisitions to keep the collections growing and to present public programs such as the one you're experiencing this evening. And we are very glad to have Frederick Douglass's great-great-grandson, Kevin Douglas Green, with us this evening. Welcome. We've actually been doing these Juneteenth programs since 2007. And that first year I found in my files, Nat and Yenna Brandt presented their book on the Underground Railroad, which was called In the Shadow of the Civil War, Passmore Williamson and the Rescue of Jane Johnson. And we've been doing it ever since, so this is probably our 17th Juneteenth or something like that. The inaugural director of the program was Erica Armstrong Dunbar, whom you might know as the author of Never Caught. And the current recently appointed director of the program is Jim Downs, whom I'll be introducing in just a minute. But before I do that, I want to briefly mention a major project that the library company is now engaged in called Beyond Glass Cases. And it's supported by the Pew Center for Arts and Heritage. And it represents our ongoing commitment to boldly, honestly, and thoughtfully interpret challenging and at times harmful collection items. And some of those controversial items you may know of. We have a pretty famous painting called Liberty, displaying the arts and sciences. And we also have a large collection of the papers of Samuel George Morton, who was a 19th century progenitor of scientific racism. And he wrote about it, and it was all based on a huge accumulation of about 1,000 human skulls that he and his agents pilfered from all over the world. Anyway, so follow us on Beyond Glass Cases, because we'll be having a number of public programs. A number of different artists, musicians have worked with these items in our collection and have created various compositions and exhibitions in response to them. And we have a series of programs taking place from July through the fall. And then in 2025, there will be a kind of a culminating exhibition in the gallery, which is now empty between exhibitions. So I encourage you all to follow us on the website and keep up to date with those programs and return to attend some of those. So now I'd like to turn the podium over to Jim Downs. He's the Gilder Lehrman National Endowment for the Humanities Professor of History at Gettysburg College. Jim was a fellow here back in 2003, about 20 years ago. And he was the speaker a couple of years ago at our annual dinner after his book came out called Maladies of Empire, How Colonialism, Slavery, and War Transformed Medicine. And among his numerous other publications is Sick from Freedom, African American Illness and Suffering During the Civil War and Reconstruction. So Jim Downs will now introduce our guest of the evening.
Thank you. Yes, sorry.
Okay, we just want to make sure that everybody in person and on Zoom can hear. Tilt this up for you. Let's see how we sound now. Here you go.
Thank you. My days as a backup dancer for Janet Jackson never prepared me for this. Kind of kidding. So first of all, as a historian, it's both mind-blowing and moving to be able to meet a descendant of the great American hero Frederick Douglass. So I'm thrilled to be able to introduce Kevin Douglas Green, who is the great-great-grandson of Frederick and Anna Mary Douglass. Kevin was born in Paris, France. He is proud to celebrate his birth the same month of his great-great-grandfather. Kevin was raised in California, but the knowledge of his ancestry was passed on to him at an early age. Jean Douglas Green, Kevin's mother, was born and raised in Washington, D.C. Jean's father was Haley G. Douglas, the son of Charles R. Douglas and the grandson of Frederick Douglass. So that means that Kevin's grandfather was the grandson of Frederick Douglass. The past doesn't seem that far away when we think about it in genealogical lines as opposed to in terms of typical years. So it's quite amazing, that connection. His grandfather was well known, respected, and active in Washington, D.C. and Maryland. Harvard educated, Haley taught over 40 years. He was also the first mayor of Highland Beach, a resort founded by his father, Charles Douglas, in the late 1800s. Charles was also a United States Colored Troop Civil War veteran. Following in his grandfather's footsteps, Kevin also enlisted in the Army and subsequently retired from the Army in 2003. Kevin currently resides in Cumberland City, Tennessee. In 2006, Kevin graduated from Middle Tennessee State University with honors. Kevin has received many awards, including the Army's Military Outstanding Volunteer Service Medal, the St. Barbara Field Artillery Medal, the National Federation of Black Veterans Award, and honorary membership with the rank of Brigadier General. Pretty impressive. Kevin has also presented his work to multiple organizations and education institutions in the United States and in countries across the world. Over the last 17 years, he has been working as a human resource specialist in the Department of Veteran Affairs. And throughout his career, he's accumulated a stunning 35 years of federal service, which is impressive. Kevin remains committed to ending slavery, human trafficking, and racism. He has teamed up with his family and is a senior advisor with the Frederick Douglass Family Initiative. He is also a supporter and speaker with Hands Across Philadelphia. And with that organization, he's actively promoting the Million Abolitionist Project to distribute Frederick Douglass books to young people around the world. And they work in coordination with the Freedom Foundation at Valley Forge, Teaching Arts Institute, a conference in Zimbabwe, and the African American Civil War Museum. It is my great pleasure and indeed an honor to welcome Kevin Douglas Green. Thank you.
I think you're doing it much, but do make sure to bring them up.
Thank you. Well, there's not much I need to say now. Thank you. Said it all. Oh, what a pleasure to be here, and what a pleasure to see everyone out in the audience. I took the time to come today to, just to learn a little bit more about history and, have the opportunity to meet me. So I think that's cool. Anyway. By the way, the Janet Jackson thing, when I was in DC one time when she was doing her tour, I happened to stay in the same hotel she was in, and one of her dancers had her shoes as they went through the lobby, and I was actually able to touch Janet Jackson's shoes. One of her dancers, backup dancer. Was that you? I don't remember. That was Oh man, definitely what a pleasure to be here at the Library Company of Philadelphia. A pleasure to be back in the city of Philadelphia. It's been, I think, 6 years now that I think 2018, the first time I came to Philadelphia, and I've been coming on an average of twice a year ever since, with Nicole Ross and Hands Across Philadelphia. Has been very gracious, very, I mean, for those who know Nicole, I mean, she's, no offense, but she's a little pit bull. She gets things done. So I hope no one takes that offense at calling her a pit bull. But for those who know her, know that she can get things done. And so as far as my ability to be here this evening and talk to you about my Frederick Douglass family legacy is what I enjoy doing, is talking about. So, there's going to be pieces of the Douglass legacy that I'm not going to talk about because that doesn't necessarily stretch down my line. And by the way, the PowerPoint that I'm using is the first time I've ever used it, and hopefully it's very helpful for everyone in the physical audience and online to be able to see information. And there might be things that I will skip, but you get some basic information about each family member within my direct line that I will talk about. And so if it works out real well, I will definitely be able to use it again. So now going forward, first thing I'd like to do, a little bit about myself, because this is important as far as my journey to get to where I am standing here with you today. We all have a journey. We all have a past. And within that journey, to get where we are, sometimes we got to recognize how we got here. And so with me, of course, I say that I was Army brat, born in Paris, France, raised in California. I was raised as Kevin Green. I didn't use my middle name. But it was not out of any deflection from being a Douglass. It was just that I was raised as Kevin Green. That's how everybody knew me. And so part of my journey is I really appreciate being able to grow up as Kevin Green. Because eventually, when it was time for me to, quote unquote, be Kevin Douglas Green, I feel that I was almost ready. When I say that, almost ready, is that, when I started doing it, I had to consciously say, okay, I want to start doing this. And I did it at certain levels to where eventually it progressed in a way to where I was not only just talking about Frederick Douglass as an ancestor of mine, or being a descendant of Frederick Douglass, but how did it benefit other people? How does history benefit us today? That's very, very important, especially for our young people, to understand how history benefits you today. Because just telling you facts and you not understanding how those facts relate to you can be confusing sometimes. So that's why within the talks that I do and things, I try to make that connection. It's very important. So growing up as Kevin Green, I was able to do everything that most children did. Being in the military, I had the opportunity to, one thing that a lot of people I don't know, I mean, a lot of people I know didn't have the opportunity to do, is I lived in Thailand, Bangkok, Thailand, as I think 10 years old for a year. Not too many people I've met can say that. So that's definitely something that's an experience that I I remember and take, hold dearly. The thing about it is, during that time, I didn't realize how special it was. And that's what we do as young people sometimes. When we're in the moment of something, especially when we're young, we don't see the value, but we're not always supposed to see the value. We were supposed to be given the gift, and later on, the value of the gift is when you know when that the little bit of dirt and everything starts to wear off. It's kind of like in reverse. A lot of things you're given something and it's shiny and bright, and it gets dull and stuff later. Well, it's opposite sometimes. You're given something and it just looks like, it's kind of like the diamond thing. You're just given a raw diamond, and then over time, when it gets worked on, it gets polished, it gets experience, it gets molded by someone who knows what to do with it, and then you end up becoming a diamond because of something that you experienced very positively in your early age. So that's part of my journey with my Douglass legacy. So I ended up joining I did go to college for about 3 years. Eventually realized that sometimes you're wasting money. So, and it's hard to go back again when you get academically expelled. So just being honest. So hey, I understood that for me to be able to do something positive in my life, and I joined the military, and I was you know sometimes I say lucky, sometimes I say fortunate, uh, to be able to do the 20 years at the time frame that I did, the way that I did it. I met my wife while I was in the Army. I am very, and this is no, to all veterans, anyone who served combat, I am not degrading that experience at all, but I'm very proud that I did not have to go to combat. Work in the Department of Veterans Affairs, I don't work directly with patients, but we see, and I've seen through living around veterans that were World War II, Korea, Vietnam, that you don't always see the physical. It's not always the physical injuries that are the most detrimental to veterans. Sometimes it's the mental injuries. And those one of the things that I am, I feel for myself, that I was able to, not being in a combat situation, that's one of those things that I don't have to carry some of that unfortunate burden that others do. So I was blessed, but nevertheless, I was still very proud to serve the time that I did and with the people that I did. So once I retired, I returned to school, and as an adult, I was able to do college the right way this time. I was able to graduate with honors, and I was very proud of that. And I'm very proud that I have my oldest daughter and my son, who just graduated from Middle Tennessee State University in December. Then we have 3 Middle Tennessee State graduates in our family. I do have 5 children. So I have 2 that did go to college, 2 that didn't go to college, but they're very creative in their arts, and they both work and live in Nashville. And then our fifth, our youngest, is at home. We homeschool, and this is her senior year. So I am very proud of all my children and the direction that they've gone, and that we've allowed them to go, and that we've supported them in the way that they've gone. They've all made us very proud up to this point, and I think they always will, as parents. And so the Douglass story. So when I talked about Douglass is I have to present something that makes not only just telling about Frederick Douglass and talking about my family, but how does it make something that not only makes sense, but is relevant to you today. And not only because as adults, we all learn something new every day too, in the way that it's presented to someone, or either you agree with it or disagree with it. It's, that's all on you. But the Frederick Douglass story, one of the things I always talk about, you want to know about Frederick Douglass? You remember what I said? You remember what I said at the library? You want to know about Frederick Douglass? Do the same thing that I did and millions of other people have done. Read his books. He wrote 3 autobiographies. That's how you learn about Frederick Douglass himself, because he put it in his own words. Now, a lot of people have gone deeper into Frederick Douglass based on historical data and, other people that Frederick Douglass knew and things like that. But the thing about Frederick Douglass I like to talk about is his journey to freedom. Now, Frederick Douglass became free more than one time. So how did he become free more than one time? So, because I like to do, this is not a presentation, this is a conversation. And I know I'm already having a conversation because I can tell by the expressions on people's faces as I'm talking, you're communicating with me as I talk. So we're having a conversation. So I don't feel like I'm up here, I'm just like the only person in the room. So I learned this a while back from storytelling. And that's how I've become more comfortable in doing this. I don't have this up here that I'm trying to read and remember and tell you. So okay, let me back up. Frederick Douglass. What is the foundation of Frederick Douglass's life? Can anybody have any idea what they think it might be? The foundation, and I'm not talking about other than being enslaved, because that's still part of the foundation. He was enslaved, so that's a fact. So that's part of his building block. But yes, sir. Learning to read and write. Exactly. That's the foundation. That's the first time Douglass became free. Just imagine, we were watching the thing on Reading Rainbow just a week ago. We remember that, growing up, watching Reading Rainbow and how important books were. But how important is a book if you can't read it? You can look at the pictures, but learning how to read and write was very important to Frederick Douglass's freedom. And, he was given just, you imagine what it takes for a forest fire to happen, whether it's lightning strike or someone dropping a cigarette or something, a match, that's very small. But look at the result of dropping a match in a forest, burns up millions of acres. In reverse, that match was given to Frederick Douglass by his owner's wife, giving him that spark, and not just giving that to him, but just him realizing the importance, realizing his environment. See, at this time, he was a young, still a child, but he was living at this time in Baltimore in a situation, not on a plantation situation. So he's seeing other kids, white kids, going to school and learning. He's seeing money being exchanged. He's seeing, how a city runs, and the things that make a city run is the ability to read and write. And that's where he's like, okay, there's something, they wouldn't be teaching people this if it wasn't important. And so that's where he grasped the importance. And so from there, he had to figure out a way to continue this, because it'd been just as simple for him to stop. Because we, even in today's society, if you're giving something and that's very important, and then no longer given to you, and you don't see the importance of it, and you figure like it's not important anymore, someone's not giving it to you anymore, it must not be important. But that wasn't the case for him. He figured it was important, so he continued. And what he did is very important. The way he learned how to read, continue to read and write is very important. He was able to barter with other children in the community for his education. So he lived in a family, even though he was enslaved, he lived in a family that had resources. They had food, but there were other white children that were poverty level. Just because, not every white person growing up, had the means. So a lot of times he might have extra bread or something that he could take out when he was able to go out into the community and barter with other kids, that these kids go to school even though they were poor, and ask them questions, and they would teach him, and he would learn from them, a lot of times without them realizing that they were actually teaching him. And so that's one of the ways he was learning how to read and write. Another part of his freedom, regardless of what your spiritual and religious beliefs are, is when he found Jesus in his life. That is another freedom that he was able to accomplish. Another level of freedom in his life, for those of you who know the Frederick Douglass story, if I say two words, I can just look at the faces here. Mr. Covey. Yeah, I see some heads nods. His experience with Mr. Covey, the Negro breaker. See, this was the time when prior to that, Fred was pretty much getting pretty full, people would say was getting pretty uppity or full of himself, because he was teaching others how to read and write. He was planning escapes and things like that. So he was sent to Mr. Covey, the Negro breaker, and Mr. Covey was very good at what he did. He basically, if you imagine, for those who don't know, if you've ever, I've never worked on a horse farm, but if you have a rogue wild horse that you want to ride, you go through extreme measures sometimes to break the horse so they're tamed and able to ride. And that's what they wanted out of Douglass, that he was no longer have the dream or the encouragement or the vision to escape. He would just be a slave. And Mr. Covey almost got him he got him so far to the point that Douglass left, was told to go back. When Douglass came back, Mr. Covey didn't work on Sundays. So Douglass had a day off. But come Monday morning, Mr. Covey was on him, and they had a fight. And Douglass overcame Mr. Covey within this fight. And at that moment, within that fight, basically the bottom line is that when Douglass overcame Mr. Covey, he had a decision to make. Mr. Covey lives or dies. Within that decision, Douglass's life, do I live or die? If he kills Mr. Covey, how does he live or die? If he let Mr. Covey live, how does he live or die? He doesn't know. he made the decision to let Mr. Covey live, but he said, no matter how long I'd be a slave in fact, but in my mind, body, and spirit, I will always be a free man from this time forward, because he had control. And the ironic thing is Mr. Covey had such a reputation that he never told nobody what happened, because if he did, he's out of business. And eventually Douglass left and went on back to the plantation, and then eventually in his life, he ended up going back to Baltimore as an adult, and he worked on the docks with a trade, like a longshoreman, and he earned money, and he was able to go back and forth, and he met Anna Murray, and they became an item, and she was a free woman. And within their relationship, eventually she said, pretty much is like, and this is just me, my words of paraphrase, that, this is the iron is hot. It's time. This is the time, Fred, because you never know. Tomorrow you could go back across the Chesapeake and not have this opportunity that the way you have it now to be able to escape. So she provided resources, not only resources, but encouragement, resources, as far as clothing and money for Fred to be able to escape. And he went north, and she followed him, and they got married, had children. So that was, where everybody basically sees his freedom. That's the point of where most people see people's freedom, is when they escape. Within the slave system, their freedom starts when they escape. But a lot of times their freedom started way before that. It just depends on where in their journey that they had, where their freedom came to them. Because a lot of times within, the slave journeys, for those who were able to escape, they had to have some other inspirations within their lives to get them to the point to where they felt free enough already that this bondage just wasn't where they belonged. They were free within their mind and spirit already. They just need to make this thing physical. So that's just part of the story I talk about for Frederick Douglass. As after he escaped, as they say, the rest is history. The things that he was able to do, as far as engaging with notable people within the abolitionist society, being able to write his own autobiography, publish newspapers, travel not only all around the United States, but across to other places. And then his second to final freedom was when foreign people from a foreign country paid his owner for his legal freedom. Because he was still, regardless, he was still belonged to someone in the eyes of the law, up until the time where they were reimbursed for Frederick Douglass. So he became legally free. And then eventually in 1895, in February, his final freedom came, where he left this earth. But he didn't leave it, he left it better than he found it. And that's what a lot of people strive to do, is leave something better than they found it. So within that, part of, just going on, our legacy, my legacy, your legacy is continuously evolving, because your legacy is not going to be defined until you are no longer here to add a page or chapter to your book. After that is what your legacy is, based on what you've done, what you've contributed. Now, after that, other people can try to define your legacy based on how they want to see you, but what you've been able to contribute is what you contribute, and that's, that's all you can do. So within his legacy, we go into his family. So his wife, Anna, mother, and for a long time, I don't know, it's not on purpose. It's just one of those things that I just kind of left her out. She was his wife, but Frederick Douglass was Frederick Douglass. But Anna, as you can see in the type on her thing, that she was a very strong woman. Not only, she raised the children, and a lot of times he was gone. She, Underground Railroad. Now, people realized her importance within the Underground Railroad in the New York State system of the things that she did with that. So Anna had a very, very important role in the success of Frederick Douglass. So, a lot of me, as when I did go overseas, when my wife had the children, knowing that she was able to take care of everything while I was gone. And that's the same thing about Anna. She was able to take care of things when Frederick wasn't there. And so Rosetta, the first child born, education was very, her being the only female and being actually the older, they started with her education and, being in, upstate New York, I mean, just right across from Canada, the idea that, hey, should not have to run, we shouldn't be running into the same bigotries that they do down south with education, but she did have to deal with those same bigotries trying to go to school as a young Black girl. But she was able to, as a family, persevere and get educated and write and teach and do things and have her own family. And then the Douglass brothers, I'll just go into Lewis and Charles. Both in the Civil War, Frederick Douglass was actually, because that's what allows me to do things I do. I can divert on the way I tell the story with having to worry about the timeline exactly. Is that within the Civil War, because Frederick Douglass, was such important figure in getting Black men free and enslaved to be able to fight in the Civil War, that he was a recruiter. And that was part of my emphasis of the importance of, at the end of my career, I retired as a recruiter. And that was part of it. I was like, hey, this is something, this is a connection for me with Frederick Douglass, is becoming a recruiter. That's one of the ways that I could have that legacy connection. But not only Fred was a recruiter, but Frederick Jr. also helped recruit. Charles and Lewis both enlisted. They were one of the first that enlisted. And actually, someone reminded me the other day that, Frederick Douglass's speech about getting, the buttons, the U.S. buttons and on your, was in where? Philadelphia. We did that. So, the importance of that. But, Lewis fought in the 54th. He became a sergeant major in the 54th. So he made rank, and he was at Fort Wagner. He fought with the 54th in very distinguished battles. Eventually, once the war was over, he worked not only prior to that, he worked with Fred in his publishing. All the sons did within his publishing of the newspapers. But Fred, Lewis and Fred and Junior both went to Colorado, to Denver, and learned more about I guess it was typesetting and the printing business. And that part of that, when I lived in Colorado, was like, hey, I have that connection too. That I think at that point I didn't even realize until I started doing some more studying that they actually were in Colorado at one time. And then, you know, Charles, well, let's go to Junior. Junior, like I said, was a recruiter. He, you know, he worked alongside Frederick and his brothers. And so, you know, he did a lot of great things also. And then Charles, my great grandfather, Frederick's son, he enlisted also. He was in the 54th at first, and then he moved to, I believe it was like 5th Cavalry, Black Colored Cavalry, something, Massachusetts Cavalry. Sometimes I get, you know, details and dates. That's sometimes why I don't try to go all that deep. That's why I write it down. So you can just read it off the board. But anyway, but he did that. And also once the war was over, he was able to, you know, follow, especially after the house in Rochester, New York was burnt down and Fred moved to Washington, D.C. They were able to follow. He was able to work within federal government. So the, you know, Freedmen's Bureau was established after the Civil War. And, you know, Douglass and General Howard with the Freedmen's Bureau. So Charles was able to get a job through, you know, through that. And eventually, and he was, you know, he had two wives. And my grandfather was from his second wife. So from Laura, I believe it is. But eventually, you know, Charles found, basically, bottom line is founded Highland Beach, just south of Annapolis, Maryland, based on the fact of basically discrimination. They just wanted to relax on the beach, and the owners of the resort next to the property would not let them. So he had the means and opportunity to be able to buy the property adjacent. And within that, as far as Highland Beach is concerned, the rest is history, because he was able to do that, parcel it out. And there are a lot of, you know, distinguished Black families within that time frame that still own property on Highland Beach today. And so that's, you know, that was very, very important. And within that, you know, he was able to have a piece of property for Frederick Douglass to have his own summer home, which was built, which still exists. It was refurbished over the years. Frederick Douglass never lived in it, though. He died before it was completed. But it is a museum today that can be visited on through you know, reservation type thing, special visitation. And along Highland Beach also is right next door to that is I know Mr. Langston, who is a good friend of my mother's, but they were descendants of John Mercer Langston and Mary Church Terrell. That's the house next to Douglass. And then the house next to that, which no longer, it was eventually sold by my mother, the summer house that my grandfather had, that she grew up every summer, had to be torn down, and she sold it, and they tore down and rebuilt it. But, you know, that's just one of those things when you can't always let the past and things that get so heavy that sometimes you just gotta let things go, because it was very expensive, taxes, and we just couldn't afford to keep it. And so it was better to sell it, someone else rebuilt and able to use the property. But you know, Douglass is still Highland Beach, regardless. And so going forward, because I know time-wise, time flies when you're having fun, is that my grandfather, Haley, Charles's son, Harvard educated, Howard educated, he was the mayor for Highland Beach. You start after you go over a certain amount of years, you just basically say forever. During his lifetime, he worked at Dunbar High School forever. My mother went to school while he was there, but he also some of the notaries he taught was Charles Drew, Justice Birch, who in Tennessee the Justice Building is named after A. Birch, Dunbar grad. So he was coached, did a lot of things in the community. So growing up in D.C., everyone knew who Haley Douglass was. And then my uncle, Joseph Douglass. Now, there's parts of family that talk, well, since it's mine, and I don't know the whole complete story and how things go, but Joseph Douglass was, from my understanding, was adopted. So as far as Joseph, whether he's actually blood Douglas, I don't know for sure, but he's still my uncle. He still has a legacy within the Douglass family. He graduated from Fisk University in Nashville. He graduated, did his graduate work at Harvard University. A dean of students, Fulbright fellow, federal government. When Frederick Douglass's home was made, when Kennedy did the signing with the League, the League of National, League of Black Women, with Barry McLeod Bethune and all that, he was there when they signed making the house a historical place. And so, my uncle, very, very, much respect for my uncle. Unfortunately, in the time, I only really got to meet my uncle once. My grandfather and my grandmother, they died before I was born. So that connection of having that legacy connection, I don't have that being able to grandfather tell the stories. So that's a little different. So then my mother, born and raised in Washington, D.C., went to Dunbar High School, spent all of her summers growing up at Highland Beach. And then eventually, she went to college. My grandmother and my grandfather died within a couple of years of each other. And so then somewhere along the line, she eventually met my father, got married. They went, that's when they ended up overseas in France. I was born, came back. He ended up being stationed in California, and that's where she lived the rest of her life, in Seaside, California. And part of that for her, like I said on it, she always still had opportunity to the ocean. She grew up on the water, so now she still had the water, so she was fine with that. She would come back every once in a while, not that much, to the East Coast, to DC or Highland Beach. I was able to probably visit Highland Beach twice with her, once as a young man, at probably junior high school age, and then later on when Highland Beach did their 100th anniversary, we came back. So that's just, she really, really, loved Highland Beach, even though she didn't get to see it as much after they moved away. And so that is really, I mean, I know I could go more, but time frame wise, it's very important that I let you engage with your thoughts. So that's very important. So outside of that, I'm sure you're going to ask me something that I know I wanted to say, but forgot, and you'll ask me the question, I'll be able to tell it to you. So are we ready for questions and answers? All right. Okay, great. And at the end, I have to remember this to you guys. This goes to you guys.
Oh, okay. So, thank you.
at the
Okay,
very end,
great.
we'll make that-
Great. Well, thank you so much for this excellent, wonderful talk. And we're just going to open it up to the audience for questions. Okay.
I still get that.
Yeah.
What's the significance of the last name Douglas? Why did Frederick choose that?
Ah, the significance of Douglas choosing his last name. It goes back to his foundation, which was reading and writing. He was able to read Lady of the Lake. And within that, the name Douglas is in Lady of the Lake. So that's one of his favorites. And he could have been walking down the street and seen a street. Well, I don't know. Do they have street signs back then? I don't know. But just imagine, he could have picked it. I mean, because I don't think Douglas was actually the first name that he chose. But when he chose the name to keep it, it was because it was something that based on something that was significant to him. It just wasn't choosing a name like Johnson. Okay, I'm gonna use Johnson. That's what I'm gonna go with. Douglas was something that meant something to him based on his being able to read.
Okay, back here.
Great, thank you for sharing your story with us today. I've got two quick questions. The first one is, you mentioned you had 5 children. So I'm wondering, to what extent do you share the Douglas story with all your children? And if any of them have embraced it to the point where they kind of want to step into your shoes someday and share that story. And the second question is, I'm wondering if you've ever read David Blight's book on Frederick Douglass, which just recently won a Pulitzer Prize, and what your thoughts are, if you have read it.
First question, thank you for bringing up his 5 children because even though her story is minimal, it's still not there. Annie was still a Douglas child, and I forgot to mention Annie that died at the age of 10. So that was still she was still part of the Douglas family. He still was able to, to spend time with Annie as a young child, even though he was overseas when she died. There was still a relationship because you imagine with your young children how much connection you have with them at younger ages, even though they might not be here any longer. My children, they have all gone to different presentations with me. They've been able to hear. Part Douglas is, as homeschooling, Douglas was part of our curriculum. They had to read about Douglas. But just like me, we allowed them to be Greens, to be themselves. And as they grow, they figure out where they fit in the legacy of Douglas, of how they want, because they go through life and same thing. People don't know that they're related to Douglas. And sometimes when I say this, I mean it with the humility that it comes with, that it's not always important that people know who I am as a Douglas, that it just doesn't fit the conversation. Like the conversation, real quick, I was talking to 2 people. They kind of had an idea, but we were just talking as just 3 adults having crudité together. And then they are you a descendant? You're wearing the shirt. Yeah, so yeah. Yes, I am. So then the conversation kind of changes a little bit. There's that, that innocence of being just Kevin Green goes out the window. Now I'm Douglas again. So I forgot the second. Oh, David Blight's book. David Blight. I haven't read his newest one in entirety, but David I've met him several different times. I've been on a panel with him. He is, he's one of the whether he's on the board or not of Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives, he is a highly respected advisor within Frederick Douglass Family Initiative. So very respect for David.
I'm fascinated by Frederick Douglass Jr., who served in the 54th, and you mentioned it, and at Fort Wagner as well. Is that's correct, right?
No, I said Lewis Douglass. Frederick Jr. did not enlist. He was like a recruiter with Frederick, but it was Lewis that fought at Fort Wagner.
Oh, so I have a question about Lewis, I guess, because that's fascinating.
Yes.
You know, obviously such an important, and he survived. Not many survived.
Yeah.
So did Lewis ever publish and about his experience? And my other question is, are there letters? Are you aware of letters that survive, you know, from the family about, you know, the service in the Civil War?
Yeah. As far as Lewis publishing, I don't know anything, but there's actually a book that is called Letters to My Father. It's a book of letters of the different children to Frederick Douglass. And some of it is based on their military experience, but yeah.
Okay, I read where Frederick Douglass didn't know who his mother and father was, but I was wondering if he has any connection to the indigenous tribes of people of America. I mean, because he kind of looks like it, so I was just wondering.
Yeah, he didn't know who his mother was. I remember was it Harriet? Yeah, Harriet was his mother, and Betsy was his grandmother. And Betsy at the time when he was growing up, Betsy was actually she was not enslaved. She kind of she was old. She wasn't considered like a slave anymore, but she raised the children. But Harriet, his mother, he didn't have a lot of contact with her. He saw her only a few times as a child growing up. And then the second part was indigenous. As far as I know, I don't know, because his father actually, from what it is as far as all we know was his one of the slave owners, as far as a white man. And as far as the indigenous connection, I don't know. Part of that, of course, is through doing DNA testing, but not that I know of.
We have a question from our virtual audience. Mary Frances Davis is wondering about the New Bedford connection. She asked if you know what church he went to in New Bedford and what the New Bedford address was.
To quickly answer that question, I do not have the detailed knowledge of his time in New Bedford. Unfortunately, that's just part of the stuff that I don't know off the top of my head. One thing I tell people, and I don't want people to seem like I'm being, it's basically that I'm not a historian on Frederick. I don't come from the aspect of being a historian on Frederick. I tell my stories based, my presentation conversations based on my pride of being a descendant. So a lot of times there's folks who are historians and educators sometimes know some of those details that I just have not taken the time to deep dive into, but I appreciate the question. Anyone else? We still got some time.
Sure. On the lighter side,
Light side, yeah.
somewhere in the Donald Trump administration.
You said light side. Anyway.
I forget the details, but he was making some sort of comment and it came through that he thought Frederick Douglass was still alive. And I wonder if you're aware of that and what you thought about that.
Yes, somewhere along the line, I did probably thank him for the amount of, internet thing that Douglas's name hit the internet. Other than that, I don't have a whole lot much more to say.
That's politics.
That's all.
Yes, and I don't do politics in that conversation.
Right in the back again, and then.
Yeah, I had another quick question.
Oh, hold on, hold on.
Have you ever traced the steps? I know you're not really a historian, but have you ever traced the steps of Frederick Douglass's life, like geographically? And specifically, I've been up to where he gave this speech to the 54th before they marched. And it'll raise the hair on your arms.
Really?
Yeah, to go up there. I don't know if you've ever been up there to
Yeah,
experience
I
it.
have not. What's this? One of the things recently is this year I've actually been to different places in New York that he's been to. Poughkeepsie and Peekskill. So I've been invited to those different places in New York. There's a lot of, Indiana, Tennessee, but no, I have not traced that. But I know one of the things that's cool is my cousin Kenneth Morris with Frederick Douglass Family Initiative, which I did, it's on the slide, but I didn't go into. He's related to Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington. So he did during the summer for the last 19 years, I think he does a Footsteps to Freedom, where they follow church from, I believe it's from Kentucky, going all the way up into Ohio, into Canada, coming back across over into, this isn't the Douglass Trail, but it's one of those Underground Railroad trails. But yeah, the Frederick Douglass Family Initiative. So just to back off the question and answer real quick is that, this is one of the reasons why I, as a family member, support Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives. My cousin Kenneth and his mother, Nettie. Nettie also grew up in Washington, D.C., spent time on Highland Beach, knew my mother. But they created this, and his journey is similar to mine. We both grew up in California, and we both grew up being able to, knowing our heritage, but doing what we grew up to do just as just part of our families. And at a certain time, and I actually did it before he did, I am a little bit older than him, but eventually there was a time where he, if you hear his story, it's a little more emotional than mine, is that, he decided, we both decided, how do our being related to Frederick Douglass benefit others? That's really pretty much the idea, is just telling people we're related doesn't really do anything in our minds. It's how can we do something, go forward and so he created Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives to stop sexual trafficking and modern day slavery. And they created curriculums within that, and pretty much that's his job. He goes all over the world, speaking, on that platform, establishing, working with Congress and the House and everything to get laws established for that. And then another part, because Frederick Douglass was born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, Eastern Shore of Washington. So Harriet and Betsy Bailey, those are Bailey family. And so Bailey still live on the Eastern Shore. So my cousin Terrence, Frederick Douglass on the hill. So that picture right there is basically and then you see me on the far right in uniform. But he's established an organization there, a grassroots local there, that he is trying to make sure that Frederick Douglass and the Bailey family are remembered in that community as one entity, not just because there's a statue of Frederick Douglass in town, but it's not just Frederick Douglass there, it's Bailey's there. And so he's really trying to create a cultural center that covers all those different things. And he's started last couple of years, and it's taken time, but he's doing a great job. And I support both. And for myself, I'm not one of those. I'm not creating an organization. We all do it on different levels, and this is the way I choose to do it. I don't see a book in my future creating an organization, but I support, as a family, we still support each other. So, that's just, as I was talking to someone about relay, when you pass the baton, not every runner has the same style to complete the race, but they have, they've got something to contribute to the race. So I was able to add that piece in that I left out. Yes.
A quick virtual question, and then if you could come to this one in the back, and then we'll come to you. Could you speak to, as much as you're able, Frederick Douglass's relationship with Susan B. Anthony and other abolitionists and suffragettes?
Oh, Susan B. Anthony and the Mott sisters and all those. Again, that's one of those parts of his life that I haven't deep dive into, because there's a Susan B. Anthony, Ida B. Wells with the lynching and Harriet Tubman. I mean, he knew them all on, the different levels of what needed to be done as far as ending slavery, as far as, women's equality, the equality of Black people in America. And, we even know today that it takes across the board to do it. So you've got, again, different strengths, and he was able to, the strength and respect that he had, he was able to lend, contribute to other causes, because, it wasn't, his whole idea just wasn't ending slavery, it was equality, for, human equality, not just equality for slaves and stuff.
We have a question back there, and then.
Yes, welcome back to Philadelphia, Mr. Kennan.
Thank you, ma'am.
You're
Good
welcome.
to see you.
Good to be here. It is my understanding that Ireland has one of the largest Frederick Douglass celebrations. I think it's in County Cork, and I believe it lasts for a week. Could you explain the relationship between Frederick Douglass and Ireland, and what he was able to borrow in exchange, because they both had their moments of fighting for justice and freedom, and if you could comment on that relationship.
Well, I wish Kenneth was here, because Kenneth, my cousin Kenneth, goes to Ireland and Cork for Frederick Douglass Week. He's, as far as Douglass family goes, he is he has that connection. But yeah, Ireland and Scotland, there's just, and England and France. He's just that whole, yeah, he has that connection with all those over there. And a lot of those countries ended, by legislation, by law, ended slavery way before the United States did. So he was accepted there a lot better as a abolitionist as he was in the United States than he was in the United States. But still, there was even during that time, equality did not equate, even though by law things stopped, by tradition and people's attitudes, things still continue. So he was able to connect with those countries to show the same thing he did in the United States, is that this educated Black men are able to be present and prominent and contribute to society.
We just have time for one question back here. That'll be our last.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
I know that Frederick Douglass was also a very prominent African-American office, political offices. I know he was basically a Republican since the party was founded up until his death. But I also found it interesting on the slide that it said that he was also a vice presidential nominee. So I'm just wondering what year election was that, and for what party was he the vice presidential nominee for?
The timeline wise, I don't know the year with that. The good question was it part of the Republican Party, which I don't think so, but so which party, because they had offshoot parties at that time. Someone might know. Do you have an answer? Okay, we have an answer.
Will you repeat it on the mic, please?
They was not run for a party. Victoria Woodhull.
Yes.
Known as the Siren of Wall Street. At first wanted the Native Americans to be her running party. But then she decided let's get Frederick Douglass. And Frederick Douglass very nicely. In the stage.
I don't have anything else to say.
Struggles. We're gonna close out. Thank you. Thank you for this. Thank you for your nice.
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to take my prerogative as chair. Just to ask.
No, I'm not.
No, it's really, I want to thank, one of the things that I want to connect it back to LCP and our findings here and stuff. So last year I was a fellow, at the African American Institute at Harvard, and one of my co-fellows was working on the Douglass family papers. And she wanted to write a biography on Anna Mary Douglass. But Anna Mary Douglass has only written 2 letters. So I said, how will you ever write an entire biography on Anna Mary Douglass if she's only authored 2 letters? And she said, I've gone to places like Library Company of Philadelphia, Massachusetts Historical Society, the places in Bedford. Anyone who had contact with Anna Mary Douglass may have written about her in a letter. She came to dinner, she was involved in this organization. It's through that correspondence and those references that she's stitching together an entire biography. What's also interesting is that she's publishing, and this goes back to some of your questions, a multi-volume encyclopedic account of all of the Douglas descendants, and it's going to be online. And to go back to this question about Edinburgh and Scotland, she's at the University of Edinburgh. So it's really fascinating to see this, because Douglas was supported by lots of abolitionists during the time, the 19th century, and that's why in Belfast, to go back to your question, there's a huge mural of him even, and there are celebrations. So it's really wonderful to see, and I just wanted to sort of emphasize that research done in rooms like this are helping to promote the Douglass legacy. So again, thank you so much for coming today. We are so happy to celebrate you.
So to close this out, one of the things I said that's very important as a library is that, as I mentioned, the Million Abolitionist Project was the family edition of Frederick Douglass, the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. So this particular book right here, which is the only one in existence of this volume that has Kenneth Morris signed it and myself. So typically either he's somewhere and he signs them, or I sign them separately. But knowing the historical significance of the library company, we wanted to make sure that you received one that was special. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming.